কৰে। এইগৰাকী নলবাৰীৰ সুসন্তান অসমীয়াৰ মাতৃৰ গৌৰৱ বীৰেন্দ্ৰ কুমাৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্যদেৱে 2021 চনৰ 5 এপ্ৰিল তাৰিখে আমাৰ মাজৰ পৰা উভতি নহাৰ বাটেৰে মেলনি মাগে। আজি আমি এইগৰাকী ব্যক্তিসত্তাৰ সোঁৱৰণতেই সদৌ অসম মুকলি প্ৰাইজমানি বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখন অনুষ্ঠিত কৰিবলৈ ওলাইছোঁ। আজি আমাৰ বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখনৰ অধ্যক্ষ হিচাপে আমি আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছোঁ ভাৰতীয় সেনাবাহিনীৰ অৱসৰপ্ৰাপ্ত কৰ্ণেল দিব্যশংকৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্য মহাশয়। শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্যদেৱ প্ৰখ্যাত আইনবিদ গৌৰীশংকৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্যৰ সুযোগ্য সন্তান। সন্মানীয় ভট্টাচাৰ্যদেৱ মেকানিকেল বিভাগৰ এমটেক হোৱাৰ লগতে সাইকোলজি বিভাগত সোণৰ পদক লাভ কৰি MA ডিগ্ৰী লাভ কৰে। ইয়াৰ লগতে ভট্টাচাৰ্যদেৱে কাউন্সেলিং বিভাগত MSc পঢ়ি একেধাৰে LLB আৰু NLM ডিগ্ৰীও লাভ কৰে। এইখিনিতে আমি বিশেষভাৱে আৰু গৌৰৱেৰে আপোনালোকক জনাব বিচাৰিছোঁ যে 1985 চনত UPSC অধীনস্থ NDA পৰীক্ষাত শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ দিব্যশংকৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্যদেৱে সৰ্বভাৰতীয় পৰ্যায়ত প্ৰথমগৰাকী আৰু এতিয়ালৈকে একমাত্ৰ অসমীয়া হয়। এইগৰাকী স্বনামধন্য ব্যক্তিক আমাৰ বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখনত অধ্যক্ষ হিচাপে পাই আমি নথৈ আনন্দিত হোৱাৰ লগতে ধন্য হৈছোঁ। আমি তেখেতক মঞ্চলৈ আগবাঢ়ি আহিবলৈ অনুৰোধ জনালোঁ। এয়া আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত দিব্যশংকৰ ভট্টাচাৰ্য। তেখেতক আমি সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব বিচাৰিছোঁ। তেখেতক সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব আলোক সন্ধানীৰ সভাপতি শ্ৰীযুত ৰামকৃষ্ণ শৰ্মাদেৱে। আজিৰ এই বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখনৰ প্ৰথমগৰাকী বিচাৰক হিচাপে আমি আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছোঁ ডাক্তৰ ৰবি কটকী বাইদেউ। জন্মসূত্ৰে ডাক্তৰ ৰবি কটকী গুৱাহাটীৰ ৰাজগড়ৰ নিবাসী। বৰ্তমান আঞ্চলিক দন্ত চিকিৎসা মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ বিভাগীয় মুৰব্বী হোৱাৰ লগতে শ্ৰীমন্ত শংকৰদেৱ স্বাস্থ্য বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ ডিন হিচাপে দায়িত্বৰত। অসমৰ বিভিন্ন কাকত আলোচনীত তেখেতৰ গুৰুত্বপূৰ্ণ ভালেমান লেখা প্ৰকাশ পাইছে। ইয়াৰ উপৰিও বাইদেউৰ দ্বাৰা ৰচিত কিছু গ্ৰন্থও প্ৰকাশ পাইছে। তাৰ ভিতৰত উল্লেখযোগ্য হৈছে কথাশিল্পী শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ হোমেন বৰগোহাঁইদেৱৰ লগত যুটীয়াভাৱে জমল 1909, 2009, 2014 আৰু 2024 চনত অসম লেখিকা সন্থাৰ বিশেষ বঁটা লাভ কৰা গ্ৰন্থকেইখন একাদিক্ৰমে আমাৰ দুপাৰী দাঁত, দাঁত আৰু সৌন্দৰ্য আৰু দাঁতৰ কথা, দাঁতৰ দিহা, হোমেন বৰগোহাঁইৰ মানস পুত্ৰ কৰুণাধাৰাৰ শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ বাইদেউ এগৰাকী ন্যাসৰক্ষী। বাইদেউ এগৰাকী কবিও হয়। 2024 চনত ডিব্ৰুগড়ত অনুষ্ঠিত হোৱা সদৌ অসম লেখিকা সন্থাৰ দ্বিবাৰ্ষিক অধিৱেশনত বাইদেউৰ দ্বাৰা ৰচিত কবিতা পুথি অকণিৰ কবিতাই বিশেষ বঁটা লাভ কৰে। এইগৰাকী বিশেষ ব্যক্তিক আজি আমাৰ বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাত প্ৰথমগৰাকী বিচাৰক হিচাপে আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছোঁ। এয়া আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত ডাক্তৰ ৰবি কটকী বাইদেউ। বাইদেউক আমি সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব বিচাৰিছোঁ। বাইদেউক সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব আলোক সন্ধানীৰ সদস্যা শ্ৰীযুতা জ্যোতিৰাণী বৈশ্যই। আজিৰ এই বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখনৰ দ্বিতীয়গৰাকী বিচাৰক হিচাপে আমি আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছোঁ শ্ৰীযুতা অপৰ্ণা দেৱী বাইদেউ। অপৰ্ণা দেৱী বাইদেউ গুৱাহাটীৰ নুনমাটিস্থিত অসম জাতীয় বিদ্যালয়ৰ জ্যেষ্ঠ শিক্ষয়িত্ৰী। শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ অপৰ্ণা দেৱী বাইদেৱে কটন কলেজত ছাত্ৰী হৈ থকা অৱস্থাত অসম তথা উত্তৰ পূৰ্বাঞ্চলৰ শ্ৰেষ্ঠ তাৰ্কিক হিচাপে খিতাপ অৰ্জন কৰে। এইখিনিতে বিশেষভাৱে উল্লেখযোগ্য যে এইগৰাকী অপৰ্ণা দেৱী বাইদেৱে বৰ্তমান অসমৰ মুখ্যমন্ত্ৰী শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ হিমন্ত বিশ্ব শৰ্মাৰ লগতো বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাত সহযোগী প্ৰতিযোগী হিচাপে অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰি বিজয়ী হৈছে। এয়া আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত শ্ৰীযুতা অপৰ্ণা দেৱী বাইদেউ। আমি বাইদেউক সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব বিচাৰিছোঁ। সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব সন্ধানৰ সদস্য প্ৰীতিমন এখেতে। আজিৰ এই বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাখনৰ তৃতীয়গৰাকী বিচাৰক হিচাপে আমি আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছোঁ শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ বিচাৰদীপ কাকতিদেৱ। শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ বিশালীপ কাকতি গুৱাহাটী হাইকোৰ্টৰ এগৰাকী অধিবক্তা, কাকতি ডাঙৰীয়া সাহিত্য একাডেমীৰ এগৰাকী সদস্য, বিশালীপ কাকতিৰ আছাম ট্ৰিবিউনকে ধৰি অসম তথা উত্তৰ পূৰ্বাঞ্চলৰ বিভিন্ন কাকত আলোচনী 100ৰো অধিক ভিন্নধৰ্মী প্ৰবন্ধ আদি প্ৰকাশ পাইছে। ইয়াৰ মাজতে দ্য এনালাইটিকেল আই শীৰ্ষক তেখেতৰ দ্বাৰা ৰচিত এখন গ্ৰন্থও প্ৰকাশ পায়। অসমৰ ইমূৰৰ পৰা সিমূৰলৈ হোৱা বিভিন্ন বিখ্যাত বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাসমূহত ইংৰাজী মাধ্যমত যোগদান কৰি শ্ৰেষ্ঠ তাৰ্কিকৰ খিতাপ কেইবাবাৰো লাভ কৰিবলৈ সক্ষম হয়। আমাৰ বিতৰ্ক প্ৰতিযোগিতাৰ অন্যতম এগৰাকী বিচাৰক হিচাপে বিশালীপ কাকতিক আমন্ত্ৰণ জনাই আনিছোঁ। এয়া আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত বিশালীপ কাকতি, তেখেতক আমি সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব বিচাৰিছোঁ। সম্বৰ্ধনা জনাব কীৰ্তিময় কাশ্যপে।
There is a slight change in the rules that have been given. Seeing the number of participants and keeping in pace with the time, the organizing committee has decided that we will just reduce the time by 1 minute. As such, all the participants will get 3 minutes of time. Although it is written 4 minutes, but right now all the participants will get 3 minutes of time. And keeping in terms with the parliamentary procedures, the mover of the house will get an additional 1 minute, that is 4 minutes. And at the end of the debate competition, the mover will get another 1 minute to sum up the debate competition. So for all the participants, it is 3 minutes. For the mover, it's 4 minutes. At the end of the debate competition, towards the end, the mover will get another 1 minute to sum up the debate competition. Any questions, any doubts? Yes, any questions, any doubts? Yes or no? Fine? Okay, we'll begin.
সরকারি পক্ষৰ দলপতি হিচাপে শ্ৰী সমীৰ ডেকা আৰু বিপক্ষত দলপতি হিচাপে দৰ্শনজ্যোতি নাথ।
শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু মহামান্য সদন, আজিৰ সত্যায়নৰ উত্থাপিত বিষয়ৰ ওপৰত মহাপক্ষে মতদান কৰিবলৈ আগবাঢ়িছোঁ। গণতন্ত্ৰ হ'ল এনে ৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় ব্যৱস্থা য'ত জনসাধাৰণৰ দ্বাৰা পৰিচালিত। গণ মানে ৰাইজ আৰু তন্ত্ৰ মানে ব্যৱস্থা, অৰ্থাৎ ৰাইজৰ দ্বাৰা পৰিচালিত শাসন। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, এইটো আমাৰ সকলোৱে জ্ঞাত যে ভাৰত হৈছে পৃথিৱীৰ বৃহত্তম গণতন্ত্ৰ। গণতন্ত্ৰৰ মূল আধাৰ হৈছে বাক স্বাধীনতা। সংবিধানৰ অনুচ্ছেদ 19(1)A মতে বাক স্বাধীনতাক এক মৌলিক অধিকাৰ হিচাপে স্বীকৃতি দিয়া হৈছে। কিন্তু বৰ্তমান দেখা গৈছে যে এই স্বাধীনতাই বৰ্তমান ভাৰতীয় গণতন্ত্ৰত বাক স্বাধীনতা বিচৰা মানে বনলিষ্ট চিকনত হাতী বিচৰাৰ দৰে অৱস্থা আহিছে। মানে সংবিধানত আছে কিন্তু বাস্তৱত ইয়াৰ কোনো পৰিলক্ষিত হোৱা নাই। মই জোৰতে ক'ব বিচাৰোঁ যে ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমে বাক স্বাধীনতাই গণতন্ত্ৰক নিশ্চিতভাৱে নিশকতীয়া কৰিছে। আৰু মই আশা ৰাখিম যে আজিৰ এই বিষয়টিত সদন আমাৰ পক্ষে একমত হয়। ধন্যবাদ।
এতিয়া মই আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰিব খুজিছোঁ দৰ্শনজ্যোতি নাথ।
Honorable Speaker, distinguished guests and respected peers. The mover hasn't established the motion of today's House. I'm here to establish the motion of today's House. The gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened democracy. I'm here.
এতিয়া মই আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰিছোঁ অঞ্জুমান ভাৰদ্বাজ for the motion.
নমস্কাৰ। সন্মানীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু মহামান্য সদন, 2023 বৰ্ষত BBC অৰ্থাৎ ব্ৰিটিছ ব্ৰডকাষ্টিং কৰ্পোৰেশ্যনে ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ বৰ্তমানৰ প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰীজন যেতিয়া 2002 চনত গুজৰাটৰ মুখ্যমন্ত্ৰী হিচাপে আছিল, সেই সময়ত যি সাম্প্ৰদায়িক সংঘৰ্ষ হৈছিল তাক লৈ ইণ্ডিয়া দ্য গুজৰাট কুৱেশ্যন নামৰ এখন তথ্যচিত্ৰ প্ৰস্তুত কৰিছিল। কিন্তু মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, অতি দুখৰ কথা, সেইজন প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰী কুকীৰ্তি উদঙাই দিয়াৰ বাবে সেই বিশেষ তথ্যচিত্ৰখন ভাৰতবৰ্ষত নিষিদ্ধ কৰা হ'ল। আৰু ক্ৰমাগতভাৱে গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকতীয়া কৰাৰ যি প্ৰচেষ্টা বৰ্তমানৰ ৰজাঘৰীয়া উঠি পৰি লাগিছে, তাৰ তীব্ৰ সমৰ্থন কৰিছোঁ। আৰু সেইবাবে উপস্থাপন কৰা বিধেয়কখনৰ অন্তঃকৰণেৰে সমৰ্থন কৰি চৰকাৰী পক্ষত আসন গ্ৰহণ কৰিছোঁ। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, ভাৰতবৰ্ষত এজন নাগৰিকৰ বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ অন্যতম উপাদান হ'ল 2005 চনত অহা তথ্য জনাৰ অধিকাৰ আইন অৰ্থাৎ RTI। কিন্তু যেতিয়া 2023 চনত ডিজিটেল ডাটা প্ৰটেকশ্যন বিলৰ নামত ইয়াত থকা 44(3) অনুচ্ছেদৰ মতে RTI এক্টৰ 8.1.J অনুচ্ছেদৰ সংশোধন কৰি এজন নাগৰিকক নিজৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা আৰু তথ্য জনাৰ অধিকাৰৰ পৰা বঞ্চিত কৰিবলৈ এই একেখন চৰকাৰে উঠি পৰি লাগে, তেতিয়া আমি উপলব্ধি কৰিব পাৰো যে কি ধৰণে অতীতৰ তুলনাত বৰ্তমান সময়ত আমাৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা ক্ৰমহ্ৰাসমানভাৱে নিশকটীয়া হৈ পৰিছে। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, তৃতীয়তে উল্লেখ কৰিব বিচাৰিছো সেইজন দিল্লী বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ অধ্যাপকৰ কথা যিজন আছিল শাৰীৰিকভাৱে 90% অক্ষম। তেখেতৰ নাম আছিল JN সাই বাবা। সেইজন JN সাই বাবা 2014 চনত আনলফুল এক্টিভিটিজ প্ৰিভেনশ্যন এক্ট অৰ্থাৎ বেআইনী কাৰ্যকলাপ প্ৰতিৰোধ আইনৰ অধীনত তেখেতক মাওবাদী হিচাপে আটক কৰা হৈছিল। আৰু সেইজন অধ্যাপকক শাৰীৰিকভাৱে 90% সক্ষম হোৱাৰ পিছতো 9 বছৰ ধৰি তেখেতক কাৰাৰুদ্ধ কৰি ৰখা হৈছিল আৰু তেখেতৰ বাক স্বাধীনতাক স্তব্ধ কৰি ৰাখিবলৈ চেষ্টা কৰা হৈছিল। ইয়াৰ পৰা এটা কথাই প্ৰমাণ হয় যে অতীতৰ তুলনাত বৰ্তমান সময়ত ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ যি বাক স্বাধীনতা সেয়া লাহে লাহে হ্ৰাস পাবলৈ ধৰিছে আৰু সেই কথা উপলব্ধি কৰিছো বাবে অন্তঃকৰণেৰে সমৰ্থন কৰিছো উত্থাপন কৰা বিধেয়কখন। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, উল্লেখ কৰিব বিচাৰিছো 2022 বৰ্ষৰ এটা ঘটনা। এগৰাকী বিদেশী সাংবাদিক ভাৰতবৰ্ষত আছিল। তেখেতৰ নাম হ'ল সেবাষ্টিয়ান ফ্ৰান্সিছ। সেইজন সেবাষ্টিয়ান ফ্ৰান্সিছে ফ্ৰান্সৰ এটা সংবাদ প্ৰতিষ্ঠানৰ হৈ ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ ব্যুৰো চিফ হিচাপে আছিল। ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ নিয়ম অনুসৰি যদি কোনোবা ভাৰতীয় নাগৰিকক কোনো এজন বিদেশী সাংবাদিকে বিয়া কৰায় তেন্তে তেখেতে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত 3 বছৰৰ কাৰণে অভাৰচিজ চিটিজেন কাৰ্ড লাভ কৰে। কিন্তু ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ চৰকাৰে সেইজন সাংবাদিকে এটা ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ চৰকাৰৰ দুৰ্নীতিগ্ৰস্ত কাম ফ্ৰান্সত প্ৰকাশ কৰাৰ বাবে তেখেতে 13 বছৰ ধৰি এগৰাকী ভাৰতীয় নাগৰিকক বিবাহ কৰোৱাৰ পাছতো তেখেতৰ বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ পৰা বঞ্চিত কৰা হ'ল আৰু চৰকাৰে সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে এই ব্যৱস্থাটো ধ্বংস কৰিবলৈ উঠি পৰি লাগিলে। আৰু সেই বাস্তৱিকতাক বুজি পাইছো বাবে আজি সমৰ্থন কৰিছো উত্থাপন কৰা বিধেয়কখন। সৰ্বশেষত সন্মানীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ ABC নিউজ অৰ্থাৎ অষ্ট্ৰেলিয়াৰ এটা সংবাদ প্ৰতিষ্ঠানত থকা এগৰাকী ভাৰতীয় মহিলাই যেতিয়া ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ চোৰাংচোৱা সংস্থাই কানাডাত এগৰাকী খালিস্তানী সন্ত্ৰাসবাদী হত্যা কৰাৰ অভিযোগ আহিছিল, তেতিয়া তেখেতে ভাৰতবৰ্ষ আৰু কানাডা দুয়োটা পক্ষ ৰাখি এটা আৰ্টিকল প্ৰকাশ কৰিছিল সেই ABC নিউজত। কিন্তু যেতিয়া ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ চৰকাৰে ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ সমালোচনাৰ কথা গম পালে তেতিয়া সেইগৰাকী সাংবাদিকৰ ভিজা কৰ্তন কৰিলে। এয়া হ'ল বৰ্তমান সময়ত এগৰাকী ভাৰতীয় সাংবাদিকৰ বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ উদাহৰণ। আৰু সৰ্বশেষত এইখিনিকে কৈ সেইগৰাকী ABC নিউজৰ সাংবাদিক অৱনী দাসে কি কৈছিল সেই বিষয়ে উল্লেখ কৰি মোৰ বক্তব্য সামৰণি মাৰিছো। তেখেতে কৈছিল, ইফ দেয়াৰ ইজ ওৱান থিং আই হেভ লাৰ্নড it's that Modi and his government can be openly resistant to accountability. ধন্যবাদ সন্মানীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়। ধন্যবাদ মহোদয়।
মত দাঙিবলৈ ভায়োলেট বৰ্মন।
मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ लोग लिखते हैं, बोलते हैं और सुनने की आज़ादी है। यहाँ हर एक सोच में, हर एक आवाज़ में एक नई कहानी है। मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ आवाज़ उठाना मना नहीं, जहाँ मतभेद का मतलब दुश्मनी नहीं। मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ लोकतंत्र सिर्फ एक शब्द नहीं, एक सोच है। Honorable Speaker, today I rise here not just to oppose this motion but to unmask it. To say that freedom of speech is declining in India is like saying that the sun is setting while standing on the broad daylight. Honorable Speaker, the very first fact that we all have gathered here today to discuss and put forward our opinion in such a topic is the very first and visible proof that freedom of speech is not at all declining in India. Honorable Speaker, I would like to put forward my argument in 3 points. In the first point, I will explain that democracy is alive. In the second point, I will explain how democracy is not just about freedom of speech, but more than that. In the third point, I will explain how reasonable restriction by our constitution is not oppression, instead it is protection of democracy. Honorable Speaker, my first point is for the members of the Treasury bench who are putting facts after facts without verifying them. Let's not forget that massive protests have been taking place in our country. From the farmers' movement, where lakhs of farmers protested. And especially the reporters covered the news without any restrictions and obstacles, from the mud fields to the gates of the parliament. Honorable Speaker, let's not forget that judiciary still roars its independence in the country. When the BBC documentary on the Gujarat riots was blocked in 2023, the Supreme Court stepped in and the block was overturned. Honorable Speaker, when I talk about press, there are still 1 lakh plus registered publications in the country, hundreds of TV channels, countless social media and YouTube persons who thunders their voice every day against power from the panchayats, the Prime Minister himself. Honorable Speaker, my second point which says that democracy is not about just freedom of speech. I'm saying that because if freedom of speech would have been the only sign of a true democracy, then the countries with loud protests but no real and free elections would be considered as democracy as well, but it is not true. In India, but in 2024, 60 crore plus Indians casted their votes, and from Delhi to Kerala, power stage, from BJP, Congress, from up to other regional parties, all face losses and wins. And this is democracy, when people has the power to dethrone any political power. Now let's talk about the opposition in the country. In our country, parliament is not just an echo chamber, it is a battlefield of voices. The opposition checks on the government, influences the bills, and also questions them. And not to forget, Honorable Speaker, we have a strong civil society, the RTI activists, the journalists, the students, everyone questions the government. My third point, that is, restriction by our constitution is not oppression. Instead, it is protection of our democracy. Some say that restrictions are a sign of fear, but I say restrictions are a sign of wisdom. I'm saying this because our constitution makers knew that, because freedom without filters becomes fire. That's why Article 19(2) was placed in the constitutions, which provides reasonable restrictions, not to silence us, but to protect the democracy from burning down itself. Thank you.
এতিয়া মই for the motion Kajal Kumari.
Greetings to the Honorable Speaker. Today, I stand here to speak for the motion, the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened the democracy. I often wonder that how does the freedom of speech that was once carved into the soul, into the heart of nation, begins to fade? How come it is possible? It is not with the loud noise, it is not with the strong noise, but with the quiet whispers, with those silent moments in which the voice shrinks and the questions dies before it could even reach to the air. Before rising to speak here, I, this member, has personally cross-checked every single fact, every single sentence, because nowadays you never know when a single sentence cannot just turn a spark into debate, but it can light a bonfire in which you can not just in the news, but you can be the news. To think of which, the freedom of speech for which the generations have fought for centuries to get this right, it does not feel like a right anymore. It feels like a privilege. Standing in this house and sharing my views, it feels like this is not the very function of the democracy, but it is a favor that could be taken away from me any moment. Some may wonder that if freedom of speech is really in danger, then how come I am standing and speaking? My dear friends, to them I would like to say that decline is rarely dramatic. It does not roar like a thunderstorm, it does not make sounds, but it is like the cracks of the ceiling of a view, harmless and quiet, until the day everything collapses. We have all seen it, haven't that little hesitation before we speak. It is not because we have nothing to speak. It is because we have learned in this era that now speaking sometimes comes at a cost. The students raise the questions, are branded as the traitor. The comedians who cracks the jokes their jokes turned into the trial. Traitor turns evidence. We have all seen it. Democracy does not die in the darkness. It dies in the daylight when we people, we become more careful, we become more hesitant, we become more silent. That's how the democracy dies and it cracks. It is the time to take the action. It is the time that we have to take the action. We have to stand for it. Because if we do not, then I doubt that that day is not far away when even this stage, when even this voice will be gone soon. And when that day will come, the history will not ask who spoke, but it will ask, why didn't we spoke? This is time to take the action. The house does not call for the noise, but it calls for the action. Action to rewrite the script. Because you are, I am the youth, the future of India. I am a journalist who deserves to present the truth. I am a student who deserves to oppose. I am a citizen who deserves to question. I deserve to step out of this house without the fear of being shot dead at the very threshold just because of my words. I deserve, and so you do. Thank you.
এতিয়া মই আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰিছোঁ ৰাজশ্ৰী শৰ্মা against the motion.
Greetings to one and all present here. When a nation speaks too freely, most of the time it fails to listen. Speech is undoubtedly one of the most powerful weapons of empowerment, but unchecked speech has a potentiality to be the weapon of mass destruction. And that's the reason why our constitution gave us not only the right to freedom of speech, but also the wisdom to speak reasonably. Though Article 19 Clause 1 guarantees that every citizen gets the right to express their views and opinions freely. But as said, everything of too much is always lethal. Article 19 Clause 2 of the same Constitution allows reasonable restriction on those speeches which has the potential to degrade national security, peace and harmony. Now looking into the recent case of 2025, where a cartoonist was arrested and was denied bail by Allahabad High Court on the grounds that he made some defaming caricature on PM Modi and Indian Air Force and cited slogans like Pakistani Air Force Zindabad. Then some so-called woke people came to the platform and accused the government that they had violated the freedom of expression of the person. So to the people who holds the view that unrestricted freedom of speech is the only way democracy can sustain, my question to them is what else the government should do in such a situation when a person of its own country has posted anti-India content on social media, specifically at the time when the nation needed support of all its members. This was the case when restriction was placed on an individual. Now what would happen if the restriction was placed on an entire institution? In 2023 winter session, 141 MPs were suspended on the grounds that they demanded some formal statement from Home Minister on the security breach in the parliament. And the reports also revealed that they disrupted the formal proceedings of the parliament. Now, whether suspending such a huge number of MPs is justified or not is open to various debate. But one of the notable things here is, even after suspending such a huge number of MPs, democracy still survived. The winter session still resumed. Bills were introduced in the House, debated and discussed, and as a result, new laws were still formed. This clearly shows that democracy is not hinged solely on unrestrained freedom. Even on temporary silence from opposition, democracy can still survive. Even in Assam, more than 60 people were arrested just because they posted some pro-Pakistani memes in the backdrop of Operation Sindoor. Now, I want to hear from the debaters who are in favor of this agenda. The freedom of speech was given to us so that we can express our views against the atrocities, raise our voice. But what if these voices are raised against the nation, against its integrity and sovereignty? So, it is the nation which should be always placed at the first place. And if these notions which carries the potential to incite division and glorify enemy forces, then in such cases, restricting those speeches, those notions are not at all harmful and unparliamentary.
Now I invite Mujahidul Islam, who will speak for the motion.
Respected House, let me take you back to the time when you were celebrating New Year with your family in the year 2025. When you were posting your celebration in the Instagram or social media sites, when you were writing whatever you want in the social media sites, thinking that your freedom of speech is completely safe. During the same time, a 28-year-old freelance journalist in Chhattisgarh was brutally murdered and put inside the septic tank, just because he had reported on the corruption on the road construction project. That is why I asked the members of the opposition bench, which freedom of speech are they referring to? The freedom of speech that allows them to write whatever they want in the social media sites about their celebrations, or the freedom of speech which is put inside the septic tank? It is due to this question it becomes my moral responsibility to stand in front of you and advocate for the motion of the House. Greetings, Honorable Speaker, sir, in the August House. Today I have a matchstick in my hand, and unlike the other side, I do not want to burn down the House with false argument. I want to light a candle. I want to put forth the positive argument that will definitely prove today's motion in the House. To understand the gradual decline in the freedom of speech, we must go back to the time when the Pahalgam terror attack happened. After the Pahalgam happened, numbers of people were arrested by the government of India. More than 90 were arrested in Assam alone. But to tell you, this crackdown on the people to ask questions to the government of India, is it not a bias? Is it not a gradual decline in the freedom of speech? Pulwama happened. We understand that that was an intelligence failure. but we didn't ask questions to the government of India. Maybe if we would have asked questions to the government of India, we could have protected Pahalgam. Now Pahalgam happened, we could not ask questions to the government of India. We didn't ask questions to the defense minister that despite so much spending on the defense budget, why such crimes happened. We didn't ask questions to the home minister, where were the security personnel. We didn't ask questions to the government of India. Now, let me take you back to the time what Veer Das, a comedian, said about Two India. I also believe that there is Two India. There is Two India, I believe. The one India where journalist Arnav Goswami of the Republic TV says and blame the Supreme Court after the Pahalgam attack. And one India where the journalist is put inside the septic tank just because he had reported on the ground reality of corruption in the road construction project. There is Two India where I believe in the democratic India when the Prime Minister of India gets time to visit the puja ceremony in the Chief Justice of India's house. But the same Prime Minister of India do not have time to visit Manipur, which is burning for 2 years. That is the democracy we are talking about here. There is Two India where I believe when the Member of Parliament Anurag Thakur in a public rally says, and I quote, "Desh ke gaddaro ko goli maro salo ko," unquote. And there is again another India where the journalists are put inside the septic tank. There is again another India where the democracy is declining, where the freedom of speech is declining. Even after all this argument, if the members of the opposition bench are still adamant to their false belief, it quite reminds me of the very famous quote by Stephen Hawking. He said, and I quote, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge." With this though, today I rest my case, but definitely not my cause. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, sir. Thank you, Honorable House.
এতিয়া মই নিমন্ত্ৰণ দিছোঁ জনঞ্জয় দেৱ এগেইনষ্ট দ্য মোশ্যন।
Greetings, Honorable Speaker, sir, and this August gathering. While I was hearing the statements of the members of proposition, I understand a very basic, simpler code that the members of proposition are using statistics just like a drunken man. Just like a drunken man uses a lamppost more for support than actual light. Honorable House of Intellectuals, I quite remember the moment few years back when I was in class 12 and my mother was scolding me. My mother told me that, "Janamjay, you have been scoring around 89% in your class 8th examination. But now in your 9th examination you scored 85, in your 10th you scored 80%, and now you are in class 12, you are hardly scoring 65%. So what was the major reason I am highlighting this? Because my mother have a comparative between two particular classes, that is class 8 and class 12. Similarly, when we took this entire motion, there is a very important term which have to be explained, and the members of proposition have clearly failed in explaining, that is the gradual decline. Now, when we talk about gradual decline, we have the end point. That for me, which was class 12 marks, currently we have that is 2025. But with whom are we comparing? Are we comparing the gradual decline with 2 years back, 5 years back, 10 years back, a decade back, or when India got independence? The members of proposition have clearly failed in explaining that what is the initial point which is being compared to the final point. Apart from that, when we move on to the second by constructive arguments, we clearly see that democracy is multi-phased. Now, why have we been mentioning? But democracy does not only is proportional to just freedom of speech. We have multiple fundamental articles and lot of factors which results in democracy. And if only the freedom of speech is reflecting the values of democracy, we have failed as a democracy. Apart from that, a worthy member of the proposition have highlighted that the freedom of speech under the Article 19 clause 1 of this Constitution guarantees us freedom of speech. But we have to define a particular line between freedom of speech and the hate speech which have been going on in the entire region of India. In that region of India, we have to differentiate the Article 19 clause 2 of the Indian Constitution, which clearly defines what is a hate speech, how it have to be taken into consideration. Apart from that, another worthy member of the proposition highlighted about how there is weakened democracy. Now, weakened democracy, if we look into multiple freedom indexes of India, we'll have to see multiple countries who hardly are ruling under dictatorship are not even coming or have in a better position than that of India. And after hearing all these statements and the changing statements of members of proposition, it quite reminds me of a very simpler quote, that if a chameleon would have been present, the chameleon would have felt insecure about his abilities, because the statements of members of proposition changes faster than a chameleon even changes his color. Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker, sir. Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker.
এতিয়া মই নিমন্ত্ৰণ কৰিছোঁ অঞ্জলি মাৰ্টি।
The Pennsylvania Gazette in 1737 vividly wrote, as I quote, "Whoever wished to overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." Unquote. As it is indeed true, Honorable Speaker, sir, I'm quite caught in a dilemma as today's motion is axiomatic. It is the plain truth that the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened the democracy. However, to further solidify the truth, I would like to present three arguments. First, what is the democracy that we're talking about? Is it the mere right to vote? No, it is not, but actual democracy entails in all types of freedom and is rooted in the citizens' freedom of expression that forms the pillar of democracy. However, as of 2025, the Liberal Democracy Index ranks India 100 among 176 nations. On the contrary, while India's World Press Freedom Index has declined to a position of 151st among 180 nations. What better testimony than this, Speaker, sir, that India's democratic backslide is caused by the erosion of freedom of speech? Secondly, the member of the opposition talked about the hate speeches that is included in the freedom of speech. Let me be clear that the right we are defending is not the freedom to incite hatred, but the democratic constitutional right of individuals to express themselves vividly in many mediums. However, in the current socio-political landscape of India, how many are able to do so marks a hollow question in its democracy. With instances where writers like Arundhati Roy or artists like Marshall Borua are detained and convicted of counter-terrorism for raising their voices, media is no exception, as mentioned by the mate of the Treasury bench. However, a member of the opposition bench talked about that Parliament is a chamber of voices. Let me remind them that our elected representatives' microphones are turned off the moment their concerns hinder or offend the ruling government, and they're framed to be anti-nationals. So, indeed, the freedom of speech is a constitutional right, but in today's India, it is not free. It comes with a cost of one's credibility, one's security, and ultimately one's patriotism. Thirdly, Speaker, sir, we must understand how the erosion of freedom of speech is depleting the democracy in our nation. As political scientists Levitsky and Ziblatt talked about the use of legal mechanisms to do so, the same can be seen in Indian context, where the outdated draconian sections of Indian Penal Code, though drafted in a new form, and UAPDC are used to enforce a censorship in the guise of maintaining public order, because it has a vague definition of terrorism. And as we all know that vagueness in law only helps the perpetrators, today Indian democracy shrink on the verge of being an electoral autocracy. Lastly, Speaker, sir, the August House must be enlightened of the fact that the censored speech is not only depleting the democracy, but is hindering the vibrant civil society where constructive criticism is a myth and we must speak against it. As last, Noam Chomsky once said, freedom of speech is a necessary condition of democracy, not a privilege to be granted or withdrawn by the state. I would like to rest my case on the note that the crashing bank of Indian democracy can only be upheld by well defining the laws that will trigger the hate speeches, as well as enable the citizens to express themselves properly and establish the democracy that Baba Saheb Ambedkar once dreamt of. Thank you.
Now I invite Krishangi Nayan Borua to speak against the motion. She is from the Assam Royal Global University.
Greetings to the Honorable Speaker, sir. Today I firmly stand here against the motion, the gradual decline of freedom of speech has weakened democracy. Firstly, I would like to let you understand what democracy truly means. Democracy is not only about the freedom to speak. It is the freedom to cast votes, to protest peacefully, to question and challenge the government, and to participate in national building. Democracy is also a system of check and balances, and India's democracy is alive and thriving even if the freedom of speech is sometimes demeaned. Now let us address the main argument. Yes, there has been allegations. Yes, there has been concern over shanking spaces in dissent, but calling it as a gradual decline and concluding that democracy is weakened is an overstatement. Speaker, sir, India has ranked 93rd out of 164 countries in Economic Intelligence Unit 2023 Democracy Index. And if we see that if freedom of speech is truly weakened, there has been 642 million votes in the recent 2024 Lok Sabha elections cast by their citizens. And would there have been oppositions in the key states like New Delhi and West Bengal? Now, I'd like to give a small example on the 2020 farmers' protest. The farmers' protest has become the world's largest protest, gaining global attention. So, if the voice has truly been silenced, would there has been such a movement known? And the Supreme Court also plays an important participation in protecting this free speech and expression. The Supreme Court has struck down in 2020 the IT rules that restrict the online portal. And let us also remember, no democracy has given unlimited speeches even in US and UK. Now, the democracy, if we look into the democracy sector, the freedom of speech is not the freedom to spread hate and misinformation. It is the freedom to debate, to question and dream aloud. And saying that democracy has weakened just because freedom of speech is sometimes regulated is not just wrong, it's very dangerous. So, and it questions and overlooks the strength of the institution, the spirit of the people, and also the facts of the million who uses voices freely and fearlessly. Yes, we must be alert. Yes, we must protect the speech. But let us not confuse between the regulation and repression or concern over collapse. Lastly, Speaker Sir, I'd like to conclude by saying that democracy is not collapsing. Democracy is thriving. Democracy is noisy, and most importantly, democracy is Indian. Thank you.
এতিয়া মই চৰকাৰী পক্ষৰ অভিপ্সা কলিতা for the motion.
Hello. Quote, my life has become an open jail. Unquote, states Siddiqui Kappan, a journalist from Kerala. Respected Speaker Person, in October 2020, Kappan was arrested by the Uttar Pradesh police while he was on his way to report on the Hathras gang rape and murder case. He was arrested under harsh laws such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and sedition without a trial for nearly 2 years. His arrest highlights how the arbitrary use of laws have intimidated the media and civil society, the foundational pillars of democracy, stifling critical voices rather than proven wrongdoing. On June 14, 2024, Delhi's Lieutenant Governor sanctioned the prosecution of renowned author Arundhati Roy and academic Sheikh Shaukat under the UAPA for alleged provocative statements that were made over a decade ago. This move highlights a dangerous trend, the misuse of stringent laws not to fight terror, but to silence dissent. And what is more alarming is the executive's strategic replacement of the Indian Penal Code with the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Far from being a legal reform, this masterstroke has been criticized for weakening the judiciary's independence and centralizing powers in the hands of the state. Together, these actions reflect a deliberate attempt to curb freedom of speech, thereby undermining and weakening the very spirit of the great Indian democracy. Greetings to the Honourable Speaker and the August House. Today I take my stand here in firm support of the presented motion, which states that the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened democracy. Said by Abraham Lincoln, and I quote, democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people, which highlights the importance of peoples as voices for a democracy to even exist. And the right to freedom of speech and expression guaranteed under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution upholds that very notion. Without it, the citizens lose their power to question, demand accountability, thereby undermining the very spirit of a democratic nation. Secondly, the efficiency of a democracy depends on factors like free and fair elections. But when money and power dominates it, it curbs individual freedom of speech and threatens universal suffrage. This was evident in the 2024 Andhra Pradesh elections. Another key factor is an active civil society. And yet in September 2022, the government banned the Popular Front of India and cancelled FCRA licenses of several environmental and human rights NGOs. Transparency is another vital factor, but media censorship, such as actions taken against Bolta Hindustan, have all proven how public expression is being curbed. Respected Speaker Person, one of the worthy members of the opposition talked about the presence of Article 19(2) in the Constitution, which allows for restrictions on the right to freedom of speech and expression. But one significant example of misuse of this particular article is the emergency period, when in the guise of protecting national security, the government censored the press, crushed dissent, and civil liberties were suspended. Thirdly, I'm so sorry, thank you.
Rohan Pollock, নিজৰ মতামত দাঙি ধৰিবলৈ আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰিছোঁ।
I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. As Evelyn Beatrice Hall once paraphrased the quote, it shows how democracy is intact, but you cannot misuse the democracy to speak what you want, because there is certain restrictions and certain ethics that must be followed. Someone from the favoring bench member spoke about the Chhattisgarh murder night where the journalist was brought to death by putting out the truth, but he has completely misunderstood one point, that also it was the Free Press Journal and the News Laundry that brought this certain news to the highlight, citing public outrage due to the same freedom of speech being intact and the same democracy being unharmed. When they bring about the thing like the broadcast bill, it is still not being implemented. Why? Because if the freedom of speech was not there, there would be no discussions over the provisions of the bill that was included. When they also bring about the Pulwama attack, that where the government is not questioned about the right about the defense minister, it is to be brought that the independent creators like Dhruv Rathi, Akash Banerjee has uploaded same video questioning the government. This shows it is not the consequences the people fear, it is the backbone that the majority today lack. And when I stand here vehemently opposing the motion being passed about the gradual decline of the freedom of speech in India has weakened democracy, because there are certain flaws that I would like to address. When there is the concept of gradual decline is not just because the freedom of speech is the very intact part of the democracy, because democracy is an intriguing living institution of many such things like an independent judiciary and active opposition and a periodic elections that are still very intact and which makes the democracy very alive. When they talk about the Article 19(1)(a) about the freedom of speech, the same person forget about the Article 2 where they impose restrictions on the grounds of public security, ethics and hate speech. When they bring about the news about the Manipur where the government has ignored and about the freedom of speech, this very same freedom of speech and this very own democracy has made the present government that has ignored Manipur overthrown with another government installed in the same state of Manipur. When we see about India being placed in the Economist Intelligence Report about the flawed democracy, it also has the United States of America, France, Brazil, which shows there are complex democracies around the ecosystem of the world, because it was United States of America which brought the Patriot Act soon after 9/11, because it was then thousands of social media were scrutinized for national security. But we here see in India that only India is to be maintaining the balance between speech and freedom, where we can also see in France where over 56 journalists were killed for raising voice, where you cannot bail is banned in the public space speaking about the religious freedom. But this is not seen in India, the very land we hear, because democracy is far from that, because the very dissent is not that, because here we are speaking about the publicly about discussing whether the freedom of speech is there or not. I would like to lastly sum up my time by saying democracy is not a glass palace that will shatter very soon. It is a banyan tree rooted very deeply and very intricately, because it is an institution based on many other values rather than completely on the freedom of speech. Thank you.
Now I invite Pradipta Roy to speak for the motion.
It is not with the benevolence of the baker that we can expect a bread, but it is certainly with the benevolence of the freedom of speech and expression that we can save our democracy from going into ruins. A very warm good afternoon to one and all present here, Honorable Speaker, sir, and the august gathering. Every democratic civilization on the planet is based on the foundation of freedom of speech and expression. It is considered as the primary criterion for autonomy. It is considered as the mother of all other freedoms, and is also regarded as a very crucial civil freedom that is protected from state repression. Honorable Speaker, sir, it is not only in India and via Article 19(1)(a) that we are guaranteed this right of freedom of speech and expression, but also on a global basis as per the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights (ICCPR) and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR) also considers the freedom of speech and expression as an international human rights law. Honorable Speaker, sir, it is true that extremism in any field and in any form is not something that is welcome, and that is precisely the reason why we also have Article 19(2) of the Constitution putting reasonable restrictions. But my question is, the reasonable restrictions are put to who exactly? The reasonable restrictions are put on the basis of decency, morality, and basically to save people, the country's people, from defamation. But unfortunately, the lines have now blurred recently. The question now remains that whether it is to save the country's people from defamation or just certain political parties and political parties in power from defamation. Honorable Speakers, as we all know, last year in 2024, we as Indians witnessed the most polarizing general election in the history of the country. But what we don't know, or rather what the mainstream media does not want to let us know, are what the events that occurred in the preceding 4 months from the election. On April 22, just 3 days after the first phase of election had just begun, Australian journalist called Avni Dias was suddenly denied visa extensions only because she covered the killing of the Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. Not only her, also Natasha Kaul, another journalist, was suddenly facing suspension of her Overseas Citizen of India OCI card just because she gave a speech on the declining democratic and constitutional values of the country soon after the BJP came into power in the year 2014. Honorable Speaker, so these are just 2 of the 134 cases that were recorded, which included abuse and harassment by the BJP party workers on the journalists who were just trying to spread news that could even remotely affect the election results. Having a say in the civic matters is very crucial for the intricacies of a functioning democracy. And so the government, or rather certain specific people, does not have the right to simply and randomly decide that, alright, today on the 12th of July, we shall provide 15% freedom to the journalists. Tomorrow we shall provide 90%, and the day after tomorrow we shall provide none at all. Honorable Speaker, sir, the Constitution's preamble provides us the right to speech, opinion, faith, worship, and religion. What is the meaning of such freedom if just writing an ex post can land you up to jail? What is the meaning of such freedom? Alright, sir, I will conclude. So to conclude, what is the meaning of such freedom if a BBC documentary can be threatened, called The India, that is the Modi question, can be threatened from banning, but a film called Emergency will never be threatened and will be published in the country. With that, I'd like to conclude by saying that democracy is not only about vote-based elections, but it is the right to have a say in the functioning. With this, I will rest my case, but not my cause. Thank you so much.
Speaker, sir, may I start? Satya Vada Dharam Char. Speak the truth, follow the path of righteousness. This very Sanskrit slok from the Tatriya Upanishad clearly shows the foundation of Indian thought, where truth, speech, and courage have always been celebrated. Speaker, sir, whenever a debate is held and a motion is set forth, the words of the motion should very carefully be selected. And today, while creating this motion, the members is democracy. Speaker, sir, talking about the first part, I will have to talk about the supreme most authority of India, which not only governs and supervises the executive and legislative, but also looks after the proper functioning of democracy. Yes, I'm talking about the judiciary. Speaker, sir, a member of the Treasury have talked about that he remembers the time when we used to safely write on the internet. Apparently, he is stating that now we cannot write it openly in the internet. Therefore, I would like to kindly remind my member from Treasury that in the year 2020, in the case of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2020, the Supreme Court has struck down Section 66A of the IP laws, which provides and stated that the suppression of freedom of speech in online has been done because of this section, and further stated that vague laws creates to misuse. Speaker, sir, secondly, coming to the case of Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India 2020, where the court declared that the access to internet is a part of the fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a). And also in the case of Romila Thapar versus Union of India, the court further stated that dissent is the safety valve of democracy. And therefore, Speaker, sir, it can be seen that the very doctrine in the functioning of democracy of India, freedom of speech is embedded, and if the citizens face any kind of suppression in freedom of speech, they can always go to the judiciary under the writs, habeas corpus petitions, and even through PIL. Speaker, sir, another member of the Treasury has stated that people have been arrested after Pahalgam, but they clearly do not understand the difference between arrest and detention. And detention can be done in order to for precaution. And Speaker sir, coming to my second part, the weakening of democracy, then I would like to just end by stating that in 2024 general election, over 66 voters turnout have been done. Even then, not even a single party managed to get more than 50% of the vote. This shows how strong the democracy of India is working. With these words, I would like to urge the members of the Treasury bench to kindly give up their baseless thought and join our hands in not passing today's motion. Thank you, Speaker sir. Thank you, House.
Terrorism. The same member of the proposition have stated about the body of a journalist dumped in the septic tank of Chhattisgarh, but I would like to remind them respectfully that the journalist was murdered by the contractor of the road as proved in the court and not by the executive of the state. Again, many members of the proposition have given the examples of Ka protest, Assam Andolan, but during Ka protest and Assam Andolan, freedom of speech was not curbed. Instead, impositions and restrictions was imposed so that incidents like Lehri massacre do not happen in future. Respected House, in 1979, Alpha United Liberation Front of Assam, they demanded to liberate Assam from India through armed struggle. The then Indian state government and our central government together curbed the freedom of speech and expression of the Alpha personnel to protect the democracy of our country. And here, member of proposition. Now I'd like to move on to my constructive argument. My argument consists of only 3 divisions, and within this stipulated time, I'm going to prove in this House that dropping the bill today is the true win of this debate and definitely the true win of our nation. The first argument is about the demography of freedom of speech. Now, the freedom of speech and expression of different people differs from region to region. For example, in a region of urban society, the citizens' freedom of speech demands proper sanitation, construction of parks, malls, etc. Whereas in rural society, the citizens' speech demands farming equipments and MSP. Similarly, in a region of younger generation, the citizens' speech demands employment and political activism. And also in the... Thank you.
মই সরকারি পক্ষৰ বিজুলী শৰ্মা নিমন্ত্ৰণ জনাইছো।
বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ ওপৰত হস্তক্ষেপ কৰাটো গণতন্ত্ৰৰ ওপৰত হস্তক্ষেপ। জৱাহৰলাল নেহৰু। সন্মানীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু উপস্থিত সদন, আজি সদনত উত্থাপিত এই বিষয়টোৰ ওপৰত মই মোৰ পূৰ্ণ সমৰ্থন আগবঢ়াই কওঁ যে ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ দৰে এখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ ওপৰত খৰ্ব কৰা মানেই হৈছে আমাৰ গণতান্ত্ৰিক যিটো আমাৰ অধিকাৰ সংবিধান প্ৰদত্ত সেই অধিকাৰ আমাৰ ক্ৰমাৎ হ্ৰাস হৈছে। গতিকে মই বৰ্তমান যি ফেচিবাদী ৰাজতন্ত্ৰ সেই ফেচিবাদী ৰাষ্ট্ৰযন্ত্ৰৰ ওপৰত মই তীব্ৰ বিৰোধিতা কৰি কওঁ যে বিৰোধী পক্ষই যিখিনি আমাৰ মতামত দাঙি ধৰিছে তেখেতসকলে প্ৰথমে উত্থাপন কৰিছে যে আমি যিহেতু ক্ৰম ভাষমান শব্দটো ব্যৱহাৰ কৰিছোঁ, গতিকে মই তেওঁলোকক এটা তথ্য জনাবলৈ বিচাৰিছোঁ যে 2019 চনৰ পৰা বৰ্তমানলৈকে কাশ্মীৰত সাংবাদিকসকলৰ ওপৰত যিখিনি নিষেধাজ্ঞা আৰোপ কৰা হৈছে, তেওঁলোকৰ যিখিনি গণতান্ত্ৰিক অধিকাৰ তেওঁলোকে যিকোনো ঠাইত জৰীপ কৰিব নোৱাৰে, তেওঁলোকৰ যিকোনো সময়তে ইণ্টাৰনেট কাটি দিয়া হয়, যিকোনো ঠাইত তেওঁলোকে ভ্ৰমণ কৰিব নোৱাৰে। তাৰপিছত মই এটা তথ্য দিব বিচাৰোঁ। উমৰ খালিদ জেএনইউৰ ছাত্ৰ নেতা বৰ্তমানতো তিহাৰ জেলত আবদ্ধ হৈ আছে। তেওঁ কা আৰু এনআৰচিৰ যিটো প্ৰটেষ্ট কৰিছিলে, গতিকে যিটো আমাৰ গণতান্ত্ৰিক সাংবিধানিক প্ৰটেষ্টৰ যিটো অধিকাৰ যিটো আমাৰ সেই অধিকাৰ আমি বৰ্তমান খৰ্ব হৈছে বুলি আমি নদি ক'ব পাৰোঁ। তাৰপিছত মহম্মদ জুবেৰ এইখন এখন আমাৰ ছেকুলাৰ কাণ্ট্ৰি, ধৰ্মনিৰপেক্ষ ৰাষ্ট্ৰ। গতিকে ধৰ্মনিৰপেক্ষ ৰাষ্ট্ৰত এটা মাত্ৰ হনিমুন পেলেচটো হনুমানৰ শব্দলৈ ৰূপান্তৰ কৰাৰ বাবে তেওঁ টুইটৰ বাবে তেওঁক আটক কৰা হ'ল। তাৰপিছত মই এটা তথ্য দাঙি ধৰিব বিচাৰোঁ যে অসমৰ বৰষাজী বুঢ়াগোহাঁই অসমত এটা এনেকুৱা পৰিস্থিতিৰ সৃষ্টি হৈছে যে কোনো কবি, সাংবাদিক, লেখকে আনকি চৰকাৰী কৰ্মচাৰীয়ে কোনো নিজৰ মত প্ৰকাশ কৰিব নোৱাৰে। বৰষাজী বুঢ়াগোহাঁইক 63 দিন তেওঁক আটক কৰি ৰখা হ'ল। সত্যৱতী দুলাল বৰাক এটা মাত্ৰ কাল্পনিক ক্ষুদ্ৰ গল্প লেখাৰ বাবে তেখেতক আটক কৰা হৈছিলে নিশা 2 বজাত। তাৰপিছত 2023 চনত যি গুজৰাটৰ যি ভাতৃঘাতী সংঘৰ্ষ হৈছিলে মুছলিম মানুহৰ মাজত, সেই 2002 চনৰ সেই বিবিচিয়ে যিখন তথ্যচিত্ৰ বনাইছিলে 2023 চন সেইখন বেন কৰা হৈছিল চৰকাৰৰ ফালৰ পৰা। তাৰপিছত মণিপুৰত যিটো জাতিগত সংঘৰ্ষ হৈছিলে, গতিকে মণিপুৰত 2023 চনৰ পৰা 2024 চনলৈকে এটা দীৰ্ঘ সময়ৰ বাবে ইণ্টাৰনেট বন্ধ কৰি ধৰা হৈছিলে। গতিকে আমি সামগ্ৰিকভাৱে যদি চাওঁ যে বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ যিটো আমাৰ সংবিধান প্ৰদত্ত অধিকাৰ, সেই অধিকাৰটো আমি সংবাদ মাধ্যম, আমি গণতান্ত্ৰিক প্ৰটেষ্ট নাইবা আমি আমাৰ লেখাৰ মাধ্যমৰ জৰিয়তে, আমি ছবিৰ মাধ্যমৰ জৰিয়তে, আজি যোৰহাটৰ যিটো বিমানৰ খননৰ ওপৰত যিটো মাৰ্চেল বৰুৱাই যোৰহাটৰ ফ্লাইঅভাৰ যিটো ছবি আঁকিছিলে, সেই ছবিখিনিকে মচি দিয়া হ'ল। কিয় মচি দিয়া হয় তাৰ পিছত মই আপোনালোকক ক'ব বিচাৰোঁ বিৰোধী পক্ষই এটা উত্থাপন কৰিছে যে আজি আমাৰ খেতিয়কসকলে নিজৰ মুক্তভাৱে নিজৰ প্ৰটেষ্ট কৰিব পাৰিছে বিৰোধিতা কৰিব পাৰিছে গতিকে আপোনালোকে জানেনে আজিৰ তাৰিখত ভাৰতবৰ্ষত খেতিয়কৰ আত্মহত্যাৰ তথ্য কিমান আপোনালোকে এটা প্ৰশ্ন কৰিছে যে আজি এই বিলখনে কিয় বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ যদি অধিকাৰী নাই তেতিয়া এই বিলখনে কিয় উত্থাপন কৰা হয় এটা শব্দ আছে মুকলি মই মাননীয় বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ সদস্যসকলৰ পৰা জানিব বিচাৰিছোঁ যে এই মুকলি বিতৰ্কখনত চৰকাৰী কৰ্মচাৰী হিচাপে মোৰ বাহিৰে কেইজন চৰকাৰী কৰ্মচাৰী উপস্থিত হৈ এই তথ্যখিনি বা এই নিজৰ মত প্ৰকাশৰ অধিকাৰখিনি অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰিবলৈ সুবিধা পাইছে যিহেতু ময়ো এজন বিভিন্ন ধৰণে আমি এই কথাখিনি ক'বলৈ বিচাৰোঁ গতিকে ইয়াৰ পৰা ওলাই যোৱাৰ পিছত যে মই এই ফেচিবাদী ৰাজতন্ত্ৰৰ বিৰুদ্ধে এইখিনি কথা কোৱাৰ বাবে মোক যে আজি এৰেষ্ট কৰা নহ'ব সেইখিনি মই নহ'লে ক'ব নোৱাৰোঁ গতিকে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় মই আৰু বৰ্তমান এই বিধেয়কখনৰ ওপৰত যিটো পলিটিকেল চেটায়াৰ আজি আপুনি পলিটিকেল চেটায়াৰ কৰক মানে আপুনি আজি নিজে কিবা এটা বিৰোধিতা কৰক আৰু জেল যাবলৈ সাজু হৈ থাকক গতিকে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় মই এই আমি ক'ব বিচাৰোঁ হয় আমি শেষত মই এই বিলখন সম্পূৰ্ণ সমৰ্থন কৰি ক'ব বিচাৰোঁ যে স্পীক ফ্ৰীলি থিংক ফ্ৰীলি ডেমক্ৰেচি লাইভছ আদাৰৱাইজ ডেমক্ৰেচি উইল ডাই
বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ সোহান গোস্বামী নিমন্ত্ৰণ জনাইছোঁ
Good morning everyone. My name is Sohan Goswami. I am from Cotton University, HS first year. भारत ही आन है, भारत ही ज्ञान है, भारत ही आज की हमारी शान है. In the house of democracy of voices still rise, freedom speaks louder than fear. Today, according to me, India's constitution is the best constitution in the world. Let's not forget, we were dependent for almost 200 years. And from then onwards, we are raising our voice against any for our betterments and our freedom till date. According to Article 19(1), it has clearly mentioned that freedom of speech remained equally among all the countrymen. India's government always support online media to raise their voice against injustice. But as a democratic country, the government cannot give the complete freedom to the general public so as to maintain the security conditions, integrity and privacy of the country. Today, my opposition has highlighted a point of erosion of press. I would like to say there is the digital platforms that empower expressions with millions of voicing opinions through the social media and online platforms without any restriction or fear, and they raise the social issues. Media houses still investigate and report freely and fearlessly, proving independence is not fully curbed. India's democracy remains vibrant with regular elections. India's democracy remains vibrant with active oppositions. India's democracy remains vibrant with civic engagement. India always supports online media in terms of infrastructure and access, but its global rank is lower due to growing control and restrictions on digital freedom of expressions. Here are some of the key points that I would like to highlight. Number 1, freedom of speech is still legally protected. Number 2, vibrant media and public discourage continues. Number 3, social media empowers common citizens. 4, reasonable restrictions maintain peace and security. Time up. 5th, thank you. This was from my side. Jai Hind, Jai Ram.
বাক স্বাধীনতা আমাৰ সংবিধানৰ অনুচ্ছেদ 19(1) প্ৰদান কৰা বাক স্বাধীনতা আমাৰ গণতান্ত্ৰিক সাংবিধানিক অৰ্থাৎ আমাৰ জন্মগত অধিকাৰ কিন্তু আজি ভাৰতবৰ্ষত সেই অধিকাৰ যদি ঘূৰে ধৰিছে সেয়া মান হয় মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, যিখন ভাৰতবৰ্ষত BBC দৰে বিশ্বৰ এখন আগশাৰী প্ৰতিষ্ঠানৰ তালাচী চলোৱা হয় কেৱল মাত্ৰ সত্য অন্বেষণ কৰিব বিচৰা এখন তথ্যচিত্ৰ নিৰ্মাণ কৰাৰ বাবদ, যিখন দেশত নিউজ ক্লিকৰ ষ্টুডিঅ'ত পুলিচ মিলিটাৰীয়ে আগুৰি ধৰে কেৱল মাত্ৰ সত্য কথা লিখাৰ বাবদ, যিখন দেশত বিজয় প্ৰধানৰ দৰে এজন সাংবাদিকক মৰিয়াই মৰিয়াই হত্যা কৰা হয় কেৱল মাত্ৰ দুৰ্নীতিৰ বিৰুদ্ধে মাত মতাৰ বাবদ, আৰু যিখন দেশত কাশ্মীৰৰ প্ৰেছ ক্লাব, মিডিয়া ওৱান তথা মহাৰাষ্ট্ৰৰ লোকসাথী মাৰাঠীৰ দৰে সংবাদ মাধ্যমবোৰ বাৰম্বাৰভাৱে বন্ধ কৰি দিয়া হয় উচ্চতম ন্যায়ালয়ৰ পৰা ক্লিন চিট পোৱাৰ পাছতো, আৰু আন নালাগে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, আমাৰ অসমতো দিলবাৰ হুছেইন মজুমদাৰৰ দৰে সাংবাদিকক গ্ৰেপ্তাৰ কৰা হয় কেৱল মাত্ৰ সাংবাদিকতা কৰাৰ বাবে, আৰু বৰ্ষাশ্ৰী বুঢ়াগোহাঁইৰ দৰে ছোৱালীক গ্ৰেপ্তাৰ কৰা হয় কেৱল মাত্ৰ নিজৰ মনৰ মতে কবিতা লিখাৰ বাবে, তেনেহ'লে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, সেইখন দেশত ক্ষমা কৰিব, সেইখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত যিখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত আপুনি মুক্তমনে বাতৰি প্ৰকাশ কৰিব নোৱাৰে, যিখন দেশত আপুনি মুক্তমনে কবিতা লিখিব নোৱাৰে, তেনেহ'লে কি যুক্তিত বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ সদস্যসকলে এইটো কথা ক'ব বিচাৰিছে যে আমাৰ ভাৰতত বাক স্বাধীনতা অক্ষুণ্ণ আছে বুলি আৰু গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকতে হোৱা নাই বুলি? আৰু সেয়েহে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, আজি এই সন্মানীয় সদনত মই আজি সদনৰ উত্থাপিত বিষয় ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমহ্ৰাসমান বাক স্বাধীনতাই গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকতীয়া কৰিছে বুলি বুকু ভিন্দাই সপক্ষে মাত মাতিবলৈ ওলাইছো। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, গণতন্ত্ৰ কেৱল 5 বছৰত একবাৰ গৈ ভোট দিয়াটোকে নহয়, ই হৈছে ৰাইজ আৰু ৰাইজৰ প্ৰতিনিধিৰ মাজত এটি সংলাপ, যি সংলাপত শব্দ হিচাপে ব্যৱহৃত হয় আপোনাৰ কবিতা, আপোনাৰ ব্যংগ, আপোনাৰ প্ৰতিবাদ, কিন্তু যেতিয়া এই শব্দবোৰক বাৰম্বাৰভাৱে বিকৃত কৰা হয়, যেতিয়া এই শব্দবোৰক বাৰম্বাৰভাৱে নজৰদাৰী কৰা হয়, তেনেহ'লে সেই মুক্ত মতামত দিয়াৰ যেতিয়া মানুহে অধিকাৰ হেৰুৱাই পেলায়, তেনেহ'লে গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকতে হোৱা নাই বুলি ক'লে তাক ভুল কোৱা হ'ব। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, আমাৰ চৰকাৰে UAPA 2019 সংশোধনী বিধায়কৰ যদি কিছুমান ৰাজহাৰবিহীন বিধায়কৰ জৰিয়তে চৰকাৰৰ বিৰুদ্ধে মাত মতা মানুহক হকে বিহকে গ্ৰেপ্তাৰ কৰিছে। এমনেষ্টি ইণ্টাৰনেশ্যনেলৰ তথ্য অনুসৰি এই বিধায়কখনৰ অধীনত 7,000 লোকক গ্ৰেপ্তাৰ কৰা হৈছিলে, কিন্তু তাৰ ভিতৰত মাত্ৰ 2% লোকেহে দোষী সাব্যস্ত কৰা হৈছে। তাৰ অৰ্থত মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, আপোনাৰ 6,860 গৰাকী মানুহক কেৱল মাত্ৰ এইভাৱে গ্ৰেপ্তাৰ কৰা হৈছিলে কাৰণ তেওঁলোকৰ যুক্তি, তেওঁলোকৰ মতামত চৰকাৰৰ বিৰুদ্ধে আছিলে। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ এজনে কৈ গৈছে যে ভাৰতৰ যিটো সংবাদ মাধ্যম ক্ৰমে বৃদ্ধি হৈ গৈ আছে, কিন্তু সেই বৃদ্ধি হ'লেও সি যে মুক্ত মতামত প্ৰকাশ কৰিব পাৰিছে তাৰে সন্দেহ আছে, কাৰণ ভাৰতৰ 90% সংবাদ মাধ্যমে পুঁজিপতিৰ কবলত। সেয়ে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, মই আজি আহ্বান জনাইছো সকলোকে যে নিজৰ যুক্তিৰ কাৰণে নহয়, নিজৰ স্বাৰ্থৰ কাৰণে নহয়, দেশৰ কাৰণে, গণতন্ত্ৰৰ বাবে আজি সদনত উত্থাপিত বিষয়খন সকলোৱে আমি সকলোৱে সমৰ্থন কৰোঁ, আৰু সমৰ্থন কৰি আমাৰ স্বেচ্ছাসেৱী শাসনৰ হাতত যোৱাৰ পৰা আমাৰ নিজৰ ভাৰতবৰ্ষখনক ৰক্ষা কৰোঁ। ধন্যবাদ।
Hello. To quote Barack Obama, the health of a democracy depends not only on the freedom to speak, but also on the quality of what is spoken and the fairness of the systems that listen, unquote. A very warm good afternoon, Speaker Sir, and the members of the House. Today I take my stand here to strongly oppose the motion of the House. I do so not to downplay the value of free speech, but to bring to light a broader, deeper, and more urgent reality that India's democratic decline is not rooted solely or even primarily in the suppression of free speech, but rather in a systemic corrosion of democratic institution, electoral manipulation, and social polarization. Speaker Sir, let me begin with the electoral system, the very cornerstone of the democratic governance. In 2017, the Government of India introduced the electoral bond scheme, allowing for anonymous unlimited corporate donations to political parties. It was marketed as a reform, but in reality it enabled opaque funding on an unprecedented scale. In February 2024, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court declared the scheme unconstitutional, citing it as a gross violation of the Article 19(1)(e), the right to information. But here is the critical fact that between 2018 and 2023, over 12,000 crore worth of electoral bonds were purchased. According to the data disclosed after judgment, more than 90% of those donations were received by the ruling party. Freedom of speech still exists, but when elections are bought rather than fought, what is the use of that speech? Similarly, the Election Commission of India, often hailed for its independence, has been under intense scrutiny for its delayed action, incompetent information of the Model Code of Conduct, and even questionable appointments such as those challenged in the Anup Baranwal versus Union of India case 2023, which led the Supreme Court to call for a more transparent process for selecting election commissioner. Speaker, sir, my second argument is that according to the Annual Status of Education Report 2023, less than 30% of students in the rural high school could truly explain what democracy means beyond voting. Even fewer could name their local representatives and describe how laws were made. This is not just a gap in knowledge, it is a crisis of democratic consciousness. From removing chapters on the Mughal Empire, civil disobedience and Ambedkar's radicalism to underfunding liberal and humanities art, we are slowly producing a generation who may memorize the preamble but never practice it. Speaker, sir, my third argument is that according to the Oxfam India Inequality Report, the top 1% Indians now control 40.5% of the nation's total income. When half of the country is excluded from the benefits of the economy, freedom of speech, my dear members of the Treasury, becomes a luxury, not a right. When democracy dies, we should understand that democracy dies not just when voices are silenced by law, but also when they are drowned out by poverty, unemployment, and also unemployment, and desperation. So I would just like to conclude by saying that as B.R. Ambedkar reminded us, democracy is not any form of government. It is a primary mode of associated living. I would like to leave this house with a question to the members of the Treasury, that if freedom of speech is truly declining, how do you account for the fact that hate speech events across India have not decreased but increased in the recent years? Is this really a suppression of expression or a redirection of it towards communal polarization? Therefore, I rest my case, but not my cause. Thank you.
Good afternoon, respected judges, Honorable Speaker, audience, and member of the House. Today I stand before you to speak for the motion, the gradual decline in the freedom of speech has weakened the democracy. The gradual decline in the freedom of speech is not just a legal or political issue. It is a deep wound to the spirit of our democracy. Our Constitution promises every citizen the right to speak, to express, and to question. But when journalists are silenced, students are arrested in their opinions, and citizens begin to fear the consequences of simply stating their thoughts, then we must ask, what kind of democracy are we living in? The gradual decline in the freedom of speech in India has deeply weakened the very foundation of our democracy. It is not just a right, it is the heartfelt of every truly democratic society. It is through the freedom that a citizen finds the courage to raise a voice against the injustice, to ask questions to those in power, and to express pain, to share ideas and to demand change. Without it, democracy is reduced to nothing more than a shell hollow and a powerhouse. But today in India, this freedom is slowly being suffocated. We see in the way that journalists are being arrested. We see in the students that are being labeled anti-
in India today. When we have fever, we use thermometers. But what is the scale or parameter which is being used here? Honorable Speaker, sir, today I stand here to speak against the motion that the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India is weakening the democracy of India. First and foremost, let's be clear, India remains one of the largest and most vibrant democracies in the world, and the claim that there has been a gradual decline in the freedom of speech in India needs to be examined with facts and not political narratives. Honorable Speaker, sir, Indian democracy is not weakened due to freedom of speech, but due to factors like weakening of democratic institutions. There have been CBI and ED raids against opposition leaders, Delhi CM Arvind Kejriwal and Jharkhand CM Hemant Soren. But the ruling party cases are always being frozen. Honorable Speaker, sir, Indian democracy is not weakened due to freedom of speech, but due to factors like rise of majoritarianism and erosion of secularism. During Delhi riots in 2020, the minorities were being...
Democracy and freedom came into existence and reality on 15th August 1947. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, addressed the nation in hopes and expectations of maintaining freedom of speech and expression and the very essence of democratic values. But Honorable Speaker, sir, sadly, after 28 years, Nehru's dreams of constitutional democracy were murdered and buried by his own daughter. On 25th June 1975, Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency, suppressing the voices, suspending fundamental rights, and the very essence of democratic values of this country. The Indian democracy stands high on the four pillars which we all know, judiciary, executive, legislature and media. The sacred cow of India, which is the judiciary, is no longer sacred when a sitting Chief Justice of India is accused of sexual assault.
Good afternoon, Honorable Speaker, sir, and the respected cabinet and respected audience. Today I want to say, if the freedom of speech has declined, then what about India rising in digital democracy index, the increase in rural publishing by 2000% over the past decade, the surge in vernacular blogs and citizen journalism, the crowdsourced modification in NEP and budget, and what about the free access to Parliament serial aid scrutiny? Also, what about the recognition of minorities, tribals and LGBTQ events publicly? Honorable Speaker, sir, in the current government, debate competitions highlighting dissent and critique has been always encouraged. There is encouragement of student-run blogs and research portals, and student suggestions invited for curriculum changes. There is
নমস্কাৰ সন্মানীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু আজিৰ এই পবিত্ৰ সদন মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় সদনৰ মতে ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমহ্ৰাসমান বাক স্বাধীনতাই গণতন্ত্ৰক নিখুঁতীয়া কৰিছে হয় মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আজিৰ এই উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কখন সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে সমৰ্থন কৰিছো আৰু লগতে নিজকে নিজে এগৰাকী চৰকাৰী পক্ষৰ সদস্য হিচাপে আজি পবিত্ৰ সদনৰ মজিয়াত আগবঢ়াই নিছো মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আজি ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ দৰে এখন দেশত যিখন দেশত নেকি 140 কোটি জনসংখ্যা অতিক্ৰম কৰি 150 কোটিকো অতিক্ৰম কৰি অৰ্থাৎ বিশ্বৰ সৰ্ববৃহৎ ৰাষ্ট্ৰ জনসংখ্যাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত চীনকো পিছ পেলালে তেনে এখন দেশত মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আজি সৰু শ্ৰেণীৰ পৰা ডাঙৰ শ্ৰেণীলৈ সকলো শ্ৰেণীৰ বা বৰ্ণ হিচাপত ৰাজনীতি হৈ আছে মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আজি এটা কথা লক্ষ্য কৰিব লগা বিষয় সন্মানীয় বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ সদস্যগৰাকীয়ে কিছু মুহূৰ্তত কৈ গ'ল যে ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ দৰে ৰাষ্ট্ৰত এতিয়াও বাক স্বাধীনতা জীয়াই আছে কিন্তু মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়
Respected Chairperson, Honorable Speaker, and to my fellow debaters, good afternoon to you all. Let me begin by asking if freedom of speech is really declining in India and how we are able to debate public protests and through various social media platforms and YouTube channels every single day. Then how can you say that freedom of speech is declining in India? Let us move beyond emotion and look at some facts. Article 19 of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of right to speech and expression. However, this freedom of right to speech hasn't been violated even during the time of crisis like COVID-19 and Manipur crisis. Critics often quote that India ranks in world press freedom 151 out of 200 countries. However, it is important to evaluate the methodologies behind these global rankings because Western media often overlooks and favors the Western.
বাক স্বাধীনতা হ্ৰাস কৰাৰ অৰ্থ এই যে আমাৰ গণতন্ত্ৰৰ বিপক্ষে গতি কৰিছে জনতা চৰকাৰখনৰ যদি জনতাই নিজৰ মনৰ ভাৱ প্ৰকাশ কৰিব নোৱাৰে তেন্তে ই এক জনতাৰ মূল মৌলিক অধিকাৰ হানি হোৱাটো হৈছে বৰ্তমানৰ চৰকাৰখনে আমাৰ এই মূল মৌলিক অধিকাৰ অৰ্থাৎ বাক স্বাধীনতা হানি কৰিব বিচাৰিছে উদাহৰণস্বৰূপে এজন নতুনকৈ উঠি অহা কবিয়ে যেতিয়া নিজৰ কবিতা ফেচবুক অথবা বাতৰি কাকতত লিখি প্ৰকাশ কৰিছিল তেতিয়া তেওঁক জেল হাজতলৈ পঠিওৱা হৈছিল ইয়াৰোপৰি আমি এনেকুৱা এখন গণতন্ত্ৰ দেশত আছোঁ য'ত আমি সংবাদ মাধ্যমক আমাৰ ভাৰতৰ চতুৰ্থ স্তম্ভ হিচাপে মানো কিন্তু আকৌ এই সংবাদ মাধ্যমৰ লগত জড়িত সাংবাদিকসকলক অত্যাচাৰ তথা জেল হাজতলৈ পঠিওৱা কাৰ্যটো আমাৰ দেশতে সংঘটিত হয় মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আমাৰ চৰকাৰখনে হয়তো পাহৰি গৈছে যে আমাৰ দেশখন এখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশ ইয়াৰ তেওঁলোকক ৰজা পতা কামটো আমাৰ সাধাৰণ ৰাইজৰে গতিকে ক্ষমতাৰ অপব্যৱহাৰ কৰি জনসাধাৰণৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা
Honorable Speaker, sir, as I was sitting in that corner and listening to the arguments of the respected members from the Treasury, for a moment I was convinced that India's freedom is on the decline. I even wiped a tear or two at the sad state that our democracy found itself. For a moment I was ready to even go and fight for the nation. Our nationalism is in danger. But may I inform those furious speakers that the topic for today's debate, the motion that they have brought forward is to
is to show the causal relationship between decline in free speech and weakening democracy. And here they have done the grave error of misunderstanding a symptom for a cause. And thereby may I remind them that correlation is not causation, and hence I rise in vehement opposition of this motion. Honorable Speaker, sir, there are four broad problematic areas in relation to this bill. The first and foremost is that the bill says that democracy has weakened. May I ask the Treasury members?
মই অনয় ফুকনে আজি সদনৰ মজিয়াত উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কৰ সমৰ্থন কৰি কওঁ যে ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমহ্ৰাসমান বাক স্বাধীনতাই গণতন্ত্ৰক নিশকতীয়া কৰিছে। Freedom of speech is a pillar of a free government. When the support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. এই উক্তি হৈছে সংবিধানৰ খচৰা কমিটিৰ সভাপতি ডক্টৰ বি.আৰ. আম্বেদকাৰৰ। স্বাধীনতাৰ পিছৰ পৰা যিমানো চৰকাৰ আছে সেই চৰকাৰসমূহে আমাৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা হস্তক্ষেপ কৰাৰ প্ৰয়াস কৰিছে, কিন্তু বৰ্তমান প্ৰেক্ষাপটত যদি আমি চাওঁ, চৰকাৰৰ কাম কাজক যদি আমি সমালোচনা কৰিবলৈ যাওঁ বা ব্যৱস্থাত চলি থকা দুৰ্নীতিৰ ওপৰত মাত মাতিবলৈ যাওঁ বা চৰকাৰে প্ৰৱৰ্তন কৰা আইন এখনৰ বিৰুদ্ধে আমি যদি প্ৰতিবাদ কৰিবলৈ যাওঁ, তেতিয়া চৰকাৰ তোষামোদকাৰীসকলে আমাক গালি শপনি পাৰে। তদুপৰি আমাৰ
মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু সন্মানীয় সদন, চন 2025 হক 1947 তাৰিখ 25 আহাৰ অৰ্থাৎ 10 জুলাই, বাৰটো আছিলে বৃহস্পতিবাৰ। তুলি লৈছিলোঁ দৈনিক অসম নামৰ বাতৰি কাকতখনৰ প্ৰথমটো পৃষ্ঠা আৰু দেখিছিলোঁ বাতৰিৰ শিৰোনাম গ্ৰহণ কৰিছিল এটা বাতৰিয়ে। সেই বাতৰিটো আছিলে যে শৈক্ষিক মূল্যায়নত ৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় গড়ৰ তলত অসম। যি প্ৰেক্ষাপটত একবিংশ শতিকাত অসমৰ প্ৰেক্ষাপটত তৃতীয় শ্ৰেণীত অধ্যয়নৰত ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীৰ 91% নাজানিছিল অংকৰ লেনদেন তথা ধনৰ লেনদেনৰ পৰিকাঠাম, যি সময়ত ষষ্ঠ শ্ৰেণীত অধ্যয়নৰত ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীৰ 73% নাজানিছিল ভগ্নাংশৰ পৰিকাঠাম, আনকি নৱম শ্ৰেণীত অধ্যয়নৰত ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীৰ 71% নাজানিছিল জ্যামিতি ত্ৰিকোণমিতিৰ পৰিসংখ্যা। সেই মুহূৰ্ততে অনুধাৱন কৰিব পাৰিছিলোঁ গণতন্ত্ৰক কোনোবাখিনিত কৰা হ'ল নিশকতীয়া। কেনেধৰণেনো আজিৰ ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীৰ কাইলৈ দেশৰ নাগৰিক।
Before I dive into this theory, let me take an example of field which has the reality reflected in it. Considering the time of in 2020 when the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed and the protests did break out, the enforcement was the only cutting or the shutdown of the internet provisions, and that clearly involves about how democracy is declining day by day in our country like the India. Good afternoon, Honorable Speaker and the esteemed members of the party. Today I stand strongly to support the motion. In the opinion of the House, the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened democracy. First of all, I'd like to say that the democracy means where a strong opposition always prevails, and when the voices of the opposition was clearly murdered and was silenced, and then the time when the decline is.
I have noticed examples and sources of Western liberal democracies and even quotations from George Washington and Barack Obama. I'm sure they would have made very good prime ministers in our country, but unfortunately they are not. Going forward, the examples and sources of Western liberal democracies where sanctity of free speech is being equated with the only way of democracy. Are you implying that our liberal democracy is the only democracy we can have in this country? If you are, then you are always welcome to my history department. I will teach you the historical differences between the West and our India. Please do not make this mistake. Liberalism flourished in society which is completely different from ours. Honorable Chairman, the champions of liberty argued how free speech would allow different ideas to be flourished, but they inherently.
Respected judges and dear audience, today I rise to talk in the favor of the motion. In the opinion of the House, the gradual decline of India's the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India has weakened its democracy. Freedom of speech is not only a constitutional but rather a common and basic human right. But in India, your words are snatched away from you before you can even speak. Here, students are shot in broad daylight, protesters are kept in custody, and comedians are kept in jail for making jokes. I believe that Indian jails are now one of the most fun places on earth because it's filled with intellectual people, students, and social workers. Well, when the actual criminals roam around free, criminals like
আৰু মহামান্য সদন আজি পোনপ্ৰথমতেই মই আজি সদনত উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কখন মই সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে সমৰ্থন কৰিছোঁ। বাক স্বাধীনতা হৈছে গণতন্ত্ৰৰ মুখ্য আধাৰ। গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশ এখনত সকলো মানুহে নিজে চিন্তা কৰাৰ নিজ মত প্ৰকাশ কৰাৰ অধিকাৰ আছে। চৰকাৰ বা প্ৰশাসনৰ ভুল পদক্ষেপসমূহক সমালোচনা কৰি জবাবদিহি কৰাৰ অধিকাৰো এখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত বাক স্বাধীনতাই জনসাধাৰণক প্ৰদান কৰিছে। কিন্তু ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ দৰে দেশ এখনত UAPAৰ অধীনত যেতিয়া বাক স্বাধীনতাক দেশত দ্ৰোহিতা বুলি প্ৰমাণ কৰা হয় তেতিয়াই কিন্তু গম পোৱা যায় গণতন্ত্ৰৰ অৱস্থা ভাৰতবৰ্ষত কিমান দুৰ্বল হৈ গৈছে। ভাৰতবৰ্ষত এনেকুৱা এটা পৰিস্থিতিৰ সৃষ্টি কৰা হৈছে যিটোৰ জৰিয়তে আজি যিকোনো এজন নাগৰিকে যদি তেখেতে চৰকাৰৰ বিৰুদ্ধে যিকোনো মত এটা দাবী এটা উত্থাপন কৰে তেতিয়াই কিন্তু তেওঁলোকক দেশত দ্ৰোহী আখ্যা দিয়া হয়। তেওঁলোকক কিন্তু কাৰাদণ্ড বিহাৰৰ উদাহৰণ আমাৰ মাজত আছে। বৰখাস্ত্ৰী বুঢ়াগোহাঁই যিগৰাকী বৰখাস্ত্ৰী বুঢ়াগোহাঁই নিজৰ মত প্ৰকাশ কৰাৰ বাবেই তেওঁ কাৰাদণ্ড বিহা হৈছিল। যিজন মাৰ্শ্বেল বৰুৱাক ছবিৰ জৰিয়তে তেওঁ মত প্ৰকাশ কৰাৰ কাৰণে তেওঁৰ ছবি মচি দিয়া হৈছিল।
মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আৰু পবিত্ৰ সদন, অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আমাৰ সন্মুখত যেতিয়া বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ দৰে প্ৰসংগসমূহ উত্থাপিত হয় তেতিয়া আহি পৰে এই বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ গ্ৰহণযোগ্যতা আৰু বৈধতাৰ কথা। কাৰণ অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় ধৰিলে হ'ল এগৰাকী ব্যক্তিয়ে ক'লে সৌটো এটা গৰু, কিন্তু সেই একেটা সময়তে আন 10গৰাকী দূৰদৃষ্টি সম্পন্ন ব্যক্তিয়ে ক'লে যে সেইটো আচলতে গৰু নহয়, ই এটা মহহে। তেতিয়াহ'লে অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় সেইটো গৰু হোৱা স্বত্তেও 10গৰাকী ব্যক্তিয়ে মহ বুলি কোৱাৰ বাবে আমাৰ সমাজখনে সেইটো গৰু হোৱাৰ স্বত্তেও মহ বুলিহে ভবা চিন্তা কৰিব। আমাৰ অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় আমাৰ ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ প্ৰেক্ষাপটতো এগৰাকী ব্যক্তিৰ শুদ্ধ মতামতকে অগ্ৰাধিকাৰ দিয়া হয় 10গৰাকী ব্যক্তিৰ অশুদ্ধ কথা, য'ত বিষয়বস্তুৰ সত্যতা নোচোৱাকৈ কেৱল প্ৰাধান্য দিয়া হয় সংখ্যাগৰিষ্ঠতাহে। আৰু অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় এয়া মই কোৱা কথা নহয়, ইয়াত তাহানিতে সামাজিক ৰাজনৈতিক দাৰ্শনিক জৰ্জ ষ্টুৱাৰ্টছ মিলে কৈ থৈ যোৱা কথা। অৰ্থাৎ অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় সংকুচিত অৱনমিত আৰু যৎ সামান্য স্বাধীনতা উপভোগ কৰি আমাৰ ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ এই বাক বোলা স্বাধীনতাৰ সময়ত ক্ৰমাহমান বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ ফলত আমাৰ ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ এই গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকটীয়া হৈছে। আৰু এই বাস্তৱিকতাখিনি বুজিছো বাবেই আজি আমাৰ দলপতিগৰাকীয়ে উত্থাপিত কৰা বিধেয়কখনৰ সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে সমৰ্থন কৰি গ্ৰহণ কৰিলো সন্মানীয় চৰকাৰী পক্ষৰ আসন। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় এগৰাকী বিৰোধী পক্ষৰ সদস্যই অভিনীলৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা ৰুদ্ধ হৈ গ'ল বুলি কৈ থৈ গ'ল। আজি উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কখনত ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমহমান বাক স্বাধীনতাৰ কথা কোৱা হৈছিল, কিন্তু অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় সেইগৰাকী
The opposition bench has clearly mentioned that the power to decide anything regarding the freedom of speech in India rests within the Supreme Court and the High Court of the country. But right after passing this statement, the same respective member contradicted himself by passing a judgment that all the dissenting views against the government are not criticisms but immoral and defamatory statement by the people of India, proving their mindset as a dictatorial mindset in this house and proving that we are living in a weakened democracy today. Good afternoon, Honorable Speaker, sir. A very warm good afternoon to the respected members of this house. Honorable Speaker, sir, when we are talking about the gradual decline of freedom of speech in India, which has weakened democracy, then at that point of time, we are not focusing on the current governance only. Because right after the first general elections, the voices and the choice of people of Kerala was rejected and shut down to the imposition of state emergency through under Article 356 of the Constitution, which only because the largest political party was not able to form a government in the respective state. And if this historical fact is unknown to the members of the opposition, then they are only reminding me of one sarcastic Assamese quote which says, "Ghorot jui lagise, teo phulor gundho loi phurise." Speaker sir, when we are claiming
সদনত উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কখনৰ প্ৰতি সম্পূৰ্ণ সপক্ষে মত প্ৰদান কৰিবলৈ মই বাধ্য। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় 2017 চন এগৰাকী সাংবাদিকক বেংগালুৰুৰ তেওঁৰ নিজৰ বাসগৃহৰ বাহিৰতে দিন দুপৰতে গুলীয়াই হত্যা কৰা হয়। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় তেওঁৰ বেলেগ ভুল একো নাছিল, এটাই ভুল আছিল সত্যৰ পক্ষে থিয় দিয়া। হাৰিয়ানাৰ কৃষকসকলে তেওঁলোকৰ অধিকাৰ বিচাৰি চৰকাৰৰ বিৰুদ্ধে কৰা আন্দোলনত তেওঁলোকৰ সহযোগিতা কৰি বাতৰি প্ৰকাশ কৰাটো সাংবাদিকগৰাকীৰ ভুল আছিল নেকি? নহয় মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, সেই অসংখ্য ঘটনাৰ ভিতৰত এইটো মাত্ৰ এনে এটা ঘটনা য'ত আমি স্পষ্টভাৱে দেখিবলৈ পাওঁ যে কেনেদৰে সাধাৰণ জনগণৰ মুখত হেঁচা দি সত্য কোৱাৰ পৰা বাধাৰীৰ অভাৱত পৰিৱেশৰ সৃষ্টি কৰে। মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, কেৱল 2022 চনৰ এপ্ৰিল মাহৰ পৰা 2025 চনৰ এপ্ৰিল মাহলৈ ভাৰত চৰকাৰে লোৱা মুঠ ঋণৰ যদি লেখ চোৱা যায়, মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় দেখিবলৈ এনে লাগিব যেন সেয়া কোনো লেখ নহয়, বৰঞ্চ কোনো ওখ পাহাৰৰ টিলালৈ যোৱা একা বেকা ওখ পথে। আনকি মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, যেতিয়া ভাৰতীয় বন বিভাগৰ এগৰাকী অন্যতম কৰ্মকৰ্তাই এই বিষয়ত প্ৰশ্ন উত্থাপন কৰিছিল, আনকি 497 পৃষ্ঠাৰ এখন অভিযোগনামা উচ্চতম ন্যায়ালয়ত দাখিল কৰিছিল, তাৰ পিছতো মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় ঋণ সন্দৰ্ভত কোনো বিশেষ তথ্য বাহিৰ নাহিল। কিন্তু সেই কৰ্মকৰ্তাগৰাকীয়ে বৰ্তমানে হাৰাশাস্তি খাবলগীয়া হৈছে। সেই কৰ্মকৰ্তাগৰাকীৰ পদোন্নতি।
So today I really wanted to start with a joke, but I'm afraid that if I even open my mouth to laugh, my next destination after this debate might be the jail. I mean, anything I say might offend anyone, right? Speaker sir, it may sound silly, but poor Munawar Farooqi spent 35 days in jail for a joke he didn't even crack. Some might just assume he might offend because he was funny, and off he went to jail. By the way, sir, he's a comedian. His job is meant to be funny. So as a non-comedic debater, I think it's better to be safe than sorry, no? Speaker sir, one of my respected oppositions just mentioned that these comedians go to jail because they use vulgar words on a public stage. But this guy didn't even get to use a word. So how on earth, forget about a vulgar word. So how on earth did he even go to the jail? Respected Speaker sir, when truth starts to be feared by the people, democracy starts to lose its meaning. Why? Because democracy means that the people have the power. But what power do we have if we do not even know the truth? Because the truth tellers are silenced by those committing the wrong simply because they want to hide away their crimes and protect their positions. Mr. Speaker, sir, is freedom truly worth it if we fear it? Yes, the Constitution grants us freedom of speech, but is it truly alive in our daily lives? Speaker, sir, democracy is measured not by how loudly its leaders speak, but by how freely its people can question them. And that, unfortunately, is under threat today. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a wall painting created by one of the most renowned Assamese artists, Mr. Neil Mohanto. But he was arrested by the Arunachal police for this creation on the 27th of March, 2021. The reason, sir, was that he wrote on the wall, "No more dams." This is it. Isn't it laughable, Mr. Speaker, sir? And if my opposition still believes that there is freedom of speech in India, I have absolutely no words. Speaker, sir, a journalist portal, Article 14, 4th February 2021 report shows, Mr. Speaker, sir, that between 2014 to 2019, there was a 28% rise in sedation cases. And Mr. Speaker, sir, conviction rates were just at a rate of 3.3%. The same report, sir, also shows that between 2010 to 2021, there were 405 people filed with sedation cases simply because they criticized the government and some politicians. This, sir, shows that it is not about our crimes. It is about us speaking up. We are punished not because we are guilty, but because we dared to speak. Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, yes, the Constitution gives the government the power to censor newspapers and block the internet in cases of emergency. But is every student protest an emergency? Is every question a threat? If every time we try to raise our voice, the internet shuts down, where is the freedom of speech? Are we protecting public safety or are we protecting those in power? Mr. Speaker, sir, according to the Internet Freedom Foundation report, the 2023 IT rules gave the government sweeping powers to cut off whatever posts they want from the internet. Now, no more code checks required, no more justifications required. If they want it gone, it's gone. That is control, sir, not freedom of speech. So, one of the
Please try to conclude.
Yes, sir. So one of the opposition members also mentioned that we don't verify our facts, and she herself said that there was no internet shutdown during the farmers' protest. There was, in fact. Please verify your own facts. Therefore, in the end, through you, Speaker, sir, I'd like to request my oppositions to please be more rational. Freedom of speech is the backbone of a healthy democracy. Cutting it cuts our power and hence weakens democracy. Thank you.
Who in the world supports free speech, published by the Future of Free Speech, has mentioned
that India falls in 24th rank out of 33 countries and has very concerningly mentioned that 37% of Indians support that the government should ban criticism of the government itself. Also, respected speaker person, Article 19, which is an international human rights organization, has published a global expression report which states that the standard of freedom of speech in India is in a crisis situation and that India's rank is 123. And also, according to the Varieties of Democracy or the VDEM report, which has mentioned that India continues to be an electoral autocracy and its rank is 100 among 179 countries. Speaker person, the Supreme Court, through various judgments such as the Bennett-Coleman versus the Union of India, Brijbhushan versus State of Delhi, Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras, has mentioned 6 crucial aspects of the freedom of speech and expression, and those are the number 1, freedom of press, number 2, right against stepping.
এগৰাকী 39 বছৰীয়া মণিপুৰী সাংবাদিকে মণিপুৰত সংঘটিত হৈ থকা দানৱীয় ঘটনাসমূহৰ ওপৰত প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰী ডাঙৰীয়াই কোনো ধৰণৰ মাত নমতাৰ বাবে ফেচবুকত এটা পোষ্ট শ্বেয়াৰ কৰিলে, যাৰ শাস্তি হিচাপে সেই সাংবাদিকজনক 1 বছৰ ধৰি কাৰাগাৰত শাস্তি বিহা হ'ল। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, সময়ে সময়ে এই এনেধৰণৰ লোকসকলে যোনে জনসাধাৰণৰ কল্যাণাৰ্থে নিজৰ বাক স্বাধীনতাখিনিক নিয়োগ কৰিব বিচাৰিছে, সেই লোকসকলৰ বিৰুদ্ধে চলা চৰকাৰৰ ক্ষমতাকেন্দ্ৰিক ষড়যন্ত্ৰই এটা কথাই প্ৰতীয়মান নিয়াইছে যে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত জনসাধাৰণৰ বাক স্বাধীনতা ক্ৰমভাৱে হ্ৰাস হৈছে আৰু যাৰ ফলত গণতন্ত্ৰ নিশকটীয়া হৈ পৰিছে। আৰু এই বাস্তৱিকতাখিনি বুজি উঠি ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ সংবিধান সমৰ্থনকাৰী এগৰাকী সজাগ আৰু সচেতন নাগৰিক হিচাপে সজোৰে সমৰ্থন কৰিছোঁ উত্থাপিত বিধেয়কখনৰ আৰু গ্ৰহণ কৰিছোঁ সন্মানীয় চৰকাৰী পক্ষৰ আসন। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ দৰে এখন বিশাল ৰাষ্ট্ৰত গণতন্ত্ৰ আৰু বাক স্বাধীনতা হৈছে একেটা মুদ্ৰাৰে ইপিঠি আৰু সিপিঠি। সেয়েহে বাক স্বাধীনতা দুৰ্বল হ'লে গণতন্ত্ৰ কেনেদৰে নিশকটীয়া হয় বুলি যদি আমি প্ৰশ্ন কৰোঁ, তেন্তে আমি আলোচনা কৰিব লাগিব গণতন্ত্ৰৰ সেই 3টা স্তম্ভ, অৰ্থাৎ সামাজিক ন্যায়, সমতা আৰু স্বতন্ত্ৰতাৰ কথা। অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয়, এখন শক্তিশালী গণতন্ত্ৰই
মাননীয় অধ্যক্ষ মহোদয় তথা মহামান্য সদন, আজি এই সদনত উত্থাপিত বিষয়টো যে ভাৰতৰ ক্ৰমহ্ৰাসমান বাক স্বাধীনতাই গণতন্ত্ৰক নিশকটীয়া কৰিছে। ইয়াৰ সম্পূৰ্ণ সমৰ্থনত মই কওঁ যে বাক স্বাধীনতা হৈছে গণতন্ত্ৰৰ এক অবিচ্ছেদ্য অংগ তথা এক গুৰুত্বপূৰ্ণ অংশ। যদি এখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত সাধাৰণ ৰাইজে বাক স্বাধীনতা তথা মুক্তভাৱে কথা কোৱা নাইবা চৰকাৰ বা কোনো প্ৰভাৱশালী ব্যক্তিৰ দুৰ্নীতিবোৰে আঙুলিয়াই দিব নোৱাৰে, তেনেহ'লে সেইখন দেশক সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে কেতিয়াও গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশ বুলিব নোৱাৰি। থকা চৰকাৰে কৰা দুৰ্নীতিবোৰ কোনো শিল্পীয়ে যদি তেওঁ নিজৰ কৰ্মৰ দ্বাৰা সেইবোৰ উদঙাই দিয়ে, তেন্তে তেওঁলোকে কাৰাগাৰত ভাত খাবলগীয়া উদাহৰণ সমাজত তেনে নগণ্য নহয়। সাধাৰণ নাগৰিকে চৰকাৰৰ দোষ বা বিৰুদ্ধাচৰণ কৰিলে ষড়যন্ত্ৰৰ বলি হয়। এখন গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশত যেতিয়া বাক স্বাধীনতা সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে হত্যা হয়, তেতিয়া